So today's guest is Kathy Olevsky. Kathy is an eighth degree black belt in karate. We're going to learn about that in a few minutes. She also holds a brown belt in judo and a black belt in jujitsu. I hope I said that right. She began her studies of the martial arts in 1979. She's the managing partner in the group of Karate International Schools in North Carolina. She teaches black belt classes and mentors the staff at the locations. She also writes a monthly blog for Karate International, and she has other writing credits as well. She's the author of Take Control, a comprehensive book on women's self-defense. But even though she's a tough cookie, it does not mean she is immune to hardship. Kathy's life dramatically changed at age 50 when she was diagnosed with microscopic polyangiitis, an ANCA associated form of vasculitis that is incurable. Well, Kathy, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks. Great to be here.
So I was trying to remember when we first met. So I did a little research. You're not going to believe this when I tell you the date. So you were doing I don't know if you remember this, we were doing a story on your self-defense class at Meredith College. It was in the evening, and it was April of 2001. Oh my gosh.
2001,
It's
wow.
like yesterday, but it was 23 years ago. And then, of course, our mutual friend who was also on the show, Brenna Krausen, recommended you, and I was all in. So I want to talk about the diagnosis, obviously, because that's a big part of your life at this point. But let's start with your career and kind of how you got into karate, because I imagine this isn't something that a ton of women are involved in, although more now than a couple of decades ago. So you opened multiple karate schools across the state. You're a black belt. You also dabble in other things other than karate. How did you get into this?
Great question. I actually got into it coming back I grew up in Raleigh, a big family, went away to East Carolina for college, came back from college, was working in a pretty good job for the state, but was already totally bored. So I decided to do something for myself, and I don't think to this day I can tell you why I decided to step into a karate school and see about karate lessons, but I did. I was the only woman. There were no children. Back then, I don't think everybody understands martial arts back in the 70s, 1970s.
Okay,
which
we're
is
going way back.
Way back. This was a time when adult men basically made up martial arts. Children didn't come into the picture until after the first Karate Kid movie.
So were you intimidated when you stepped into that karate studio?
I would say that I was not a confident person, but that I was intrigued. And I had never done anything quite like this. I wasn't an athlete. I wasn't a self-starter, go-do-everything person. I was in a relationship that was a little bit rocky, and I felt like I needed something.
Something to make you feel strong.
Yeah, I think that's probably what was in the back of my mind, but not the front of my mind.
And so you start getting involved. How did you work your way up to becoming a black belt? I mean, talk about the process. How difficult is that?
Well, it's actually not a difficult process for people now. It was difficult at the time, and I will admit that was an 8-year process for me. For most people, it's 3 to 4 years of learning. It's not anything you have to be a natural at. It's a taught skill. I mean, most people, before they ride a bike, they see people riding bikes, but most people before they start martial arts back then never had seen that or done it. So it is something that you learn just by being taught, and it's just a matter of sticking to it. And that's kind of what I did.
Now, you're not just, you're a black belt in karate, but then you also do some other disciplines. So talk about those, how and what the difference is.
Well, way back when, the only thing I did was karate. And then my husband, who is my partner in life and my partner in business, is probably a really special person in the martial arts, in that every time he attained something great in a martial art, he started over at a new one. So he is a big believer in putting a white belt on and starting over in something. So that's kind of what he did, and I just thought it was also important. I don't do all the martial arts that he does, but I did judo, which is a really, really hard throwing hard on the body kind of thing. So as I aged, I kind of backed away from that a little bit and stayed more in the karate lane. Jiu-jitsu was fun for me. It was very much about, and it's very popular right now, it's very much about wrestling, grappling. It was fun because I learned to use, even though I was small, be able to use that against an opponent through direction and motion and understanding body balance and that sort of thing.
If we can only do that in life, right?
Yes, exactly.
So you said white belt, and I'm intrigued because I'm a curious person and I don't know a lot about karate. So is the white belt the first?
white
and then
belt's the
how many are there until you get to a black belt?
It kind of depends on whichever art it is. Most karate and taekwondo programs have 8 belts, white belt to black belt, and then there are 10 belts after that, 10 degrees of black belt. Most judo has multiple belts because there are children's belts that are more than the adult belts. And jiu-jitsu, I mean, it depends a little bit on who your teacher is because they can adopt a slightly different system. I was at a martial arts school in New England one time that had like 25 belts.
So it just depends.
Yes.
So how do you get from, oh, this is kind of cool, I'm going to try this, to I'm going to make this my life's work? I mean, how did that go?
Well, that goes along with the relationship, basically. I started in karate, and then I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks later, my husband stepped on the floor as an instructor. He had been away teaching in a different program, and he wasn't my husband at the time, obviously. And, you know, long story, very short, he asked me out on a date. I said no 5 times. We eventually did date and got married. And after we were, I think actually before we were married, we bought that business from his instructor. And then from there, we just kind of grew our life that way. I was the learn by default business partner and also one of the teachers. And he was the teacher that was in charge of everybody and everything.
So like the lead teacher. So how many schools are there?
Right now there are 3. There have been times where there were, I don't know, maybe 12. There was the 2 of us were responsible for 5 in the 80s and 90s, and then when we had children, that was too much.
So you dialed that back a little bit.
Yes. So we have 3 right now, and actually they're independently owned. We mentor all of them, and it's sort of like a licensee situation.
So talk about women in this space. What did you see back then? You said you were the only woman when you walked in. And what are you seeing now, and what is attracting women to this?
Well, there are actually a lot of women in martial arts, and I think they all come to it for different reasons. Most people think they come to it for self-defense, but in a survey that I did probably 15 years ago, a lot of them did not come to it for self-defense. They came to it for an activity, a physical activity that would be interesting, that they could do their whole life, that was indoors. So they weren't out in the heat.
Good point.
And they were something that that was different, that would challenge them daily. And so there are a lot of women in the martial arts, if they get started in a program where they see other women.
They need that support, and they need mentors.
You do, and we grew women early in the program and children as soon as it became an interest for people. We focused a little bit on that and diversity in our program so that we had all different cultures and just we wanted to make it comfortable for everybody that wanted to come through the door. And the saying was, I need to see somebody that looks like me.
That makes a lot of sense. Are there things that make women particularly good at martial arts that give them a little bit of an edge?
There are things that make them, and everybody's an individual, so what's great for one woman might not be the same for another woman, but most women enjoy the forms, which are called katas in the martial arts, because it's a memorized routine. I sort of compare it to what we all know of as a memorized gymnastic floor routine.
Well, maybe yoga as well, because we have poses in yoga.
And we do yoga in the beginning of every class. It's part of the stretching routine, so there's some familiarity there. But even when we started, people weren't doing yoga. So that's something that also has grown with us. women particularly, I think, enjoy building their self-confidence with it though. So whereas they don't always love all of the aspects of it, I think just like any other student, they learn all the aspects of it and learn to enjoy all the pieces of it, which is what I did. I didn't actually like the sparring when I started, but that was my favorite part as I got more
As you got
advanced. Yes.
better at it, I would
Yes.
think. So let's talk about, you mentioned self-defense, so that's how I met you. Let's talk about self-defense because I think it's so important, and you hear so many mixed messages, right? Especially with social media now telling you do this, don't do that. Talk about how you teach it and what you find to be the most important takeaways.
Well, the self-defense program that we teach at Karate International is basically called Take Control, and that's what I wrote the book about. And we developed it because the only programs were taught and written by men, and their perspective of what a woman thinks when she's learning self-defense is a little bit different. So basically, I took the things that made a woman not have to memorize or practice a technique and developed them so that they could do them one time and feel confident in them. I actually don't teach those classes anymore. I have a great protege, 2 or 3 great proteges that teach them, and they do a great job with it, but it's basically not anything that you have to memorize or continue to do.
Let me see if I can remember a few of the things from your class. And I'm probably going to be wrong, but I remember talking about if somebody throws you over their shoulder, if you're tiny, especially, not to just go over their shoulder, but to stand up to make it harder for them to hold on to you. Was that one?
That's one, and that's part of the body balance thing.
Yeah.
People do not understand how easy it is to change what position you get put in by utilizing your body balance, which I learned in judo.
Well, there was something else I remember about holding on, somebody's holding onto your arm and you're twisting instead of pulling to get your arm out. And then the other thing I remember is sitting down. In other words, keeping your center of gravity on the ground. So if somebody's pulling you or trying to get you up, you sit down and try to keep them from being able to do that.
So that's really interesting that you remember those things, and it encourages me because, as I told you, we try to develop a program that you don't have to practice, but something that will stick with you. Everybody takes different messages from it. Those are some of the messages from it. There are a lot having to do, like I said, with body balance. When I used to teach this program, I would say, I actually learned a lot of this from growing up in a family with 4 brothers who tortured me regularly.
Gotcha. That would make that happen. Yeah.
And then my martial arts. And so I'm glad that you remembered those lessons.
23 years ago.
Yes, that's great.
And do you teach them anything about what to say, to scream, to yell, to get attention?
We do teach them something that's typically taught in karate, which is called a ki, which is a noise that channels your breathing. So if you're in a panic, you would tend to hyperventilate. So if you yell, you can yell fire, you should yell no, but you can yell anything that you want to yell. You can scream at the top of your lungs, I don't care, as long as you exhale. Because if you exhale, you will inhale. And so this sort of channels your aggression. It also can scare your opponent. So the person that's your attacker, that's trying to attack you, so a lot of reasons. It also tightens up your abdomen so that if you were hit in any way. So there's a lot of reasons to learn to yell. And that's one of the hardest lessons actually to teach a lot of women, is that they have to, not so much anymore, but probably 30 years ago, yes.
That makes a lot of sense. I was mugged in, oh gosh, I don't even know, early 2000s. And it was in downtown Raleigh. And I lost my voice when the person threw me to the ground. I could not scream. And I just kept trying to find it. And I finally did. And somebody did finally hear me and, come and get the person off me. But it was scary to me that I just couldn't find my voice. And I think you're right. It's part of that breathing thing. Most of my self-defense information, other than that I remember from 23 years ago, came from police officers that I interviewed over the years. And I remember one of them is, somebody wants your keys, you throw keys one way, you go the other way. You know, you don't ever get yourself in a situation where somebody can get you into a car, things like that. Or you throw your purse one direction, you go the other direction. So those are all really good points. And like I said, you know, I think people have a misconception about what self-defense is.
Right.
You
They
know?
they very often think. Now, I would be the first one to say that I would love to see every single person who's looking for self-defense in martial arts for their whole life, because it's a great foundation, but you can also do short-term things. So something is always better than nothing.
Absolutely. So let's talk about your health diagnosis, because this has become a big part of your life. It's impacted your life. Tell me what it is and when you found out and what the symptoms were.
I found out when I was 50 years old. I had a year and a half of seeing many different doctors because I had so many strange symptoms, pain between my shoulder blades and my back, just like, I can't even tell you all the things, breathing problems, there were GI problems, there was just all sorts of things, and energy level tanking. But I was 50 when this happened, and I was in the best shape of my life. I was at a place in my life where my children were grown up a lot, and I could devote more time to myself and I didn't have such a crazy schedule, and I was so into my career in the martial arts and so happy. And anyway, I was sick a lot, and I had a great doctor who believed me, and she sent me to all these other specialists who did not believe me. Told me had the word of the time was stress, and that it was stress affecting me, and I needed to learn to deal with my stress. And I would say, you just don't understand. I'm one of the best people in the world for dealing with stress.
Right, because you had such a great outlet.
I have a great outlet, and I handle a lot of stress. So anyway, I had been sent to a rheumatologist and was going to be put on some medication for all the pain throughout my body. So I had to have some labs done to do that. And I went to Florida with my husband on a vacation and got a call while I was down there, and they said, you are in kidney failure, we believe. You need to go straight to the hospital or drive straight home and go to it here. So I came home. We had a black belt who was a nephrologist, and we called him on the drive home, and he said, come straight to my office. So we went and saw him. He said, I think I know what this is, but we need more blood work done because it's new to me. So he went to the lab across the hallway and directed them what to do. We had the lab work. He said, yes, this is in fact something called ANCA Associated Vasculitis, probably something called Microscopic Polyangiitis, and we need to do a kidney biopsy. So he got me into Wake Med in like one day, and they biopsied me, and from there it's just a crazy story. But I went straight to UNC Chapel Hill because it just so happened that the world specialist in my disease was at Chapel Hill.
Which was very lucky. How many years ago was this?
This was in 2008, so 16, whatever. I can't remember how many years ago, but I spent 21 days in the hospital because I was in kidney failure at the time. And this is a disease that affects about 1 in 100,000 people, and more men than women. But it typically happens around 50.
Is it genetic?
It is not genetic. There is no known cause, and there is no known cure.
So how do you manage it?
It is managed with treatment. I spent 6 years on and off chemotherapy. That was
The standard of care?
yeah, steroids and chemotherapy. I had something called plasmapheresis, where they take your blood out and clean it and put it back in. So there was a lot of things that were done to me in the early days. It is a lot more understood now. There are a lot of doctors going into this field, which is really great. I was in what they call remission, which means my disease was quiet and I was off medication for 8 years. And then about a year and a half ago, I had a relapse. And so I did pretty well in those 8 years I was off. It took me 3 years of hard work to get back to some form of good physical condition. But I had 5 years of really pretty good. And then I had my relapse. So
How are you doing now?
I'm very good now. I still struggle a little bit. I would love to be in better shape, but I've learned in my life to take every day as it is and enjoy every single one for everything that I can do. So I don't beat myself up about it. A lot of people do when they're not who they used to be. And I just choose happiness every day.
That's definitely a good choice for sure. So, what we talk about a lot in this podcast is life transformation, whether it's a choice or whether something comes along to derail you, which is what happened to you. And a lot of women get really hopeless if they have a bad health diagnosis, lose a loved one, lose a job, and they just don't feel like there's anything else. There's not another chapter. So you've been through a lot. You've obviously overcome a lot. What kind of advice would you give to women that feel like that right now, that are looking for something, to light their fire and they just don't see it?
Well, one of the hardest things to do is take a step in a new direction. And that's why a lot of people don't do things that can make them more mentally healthy. Just being physically active can make you more mentally healthy, but good gracious, when you're so tired, you can't put one foot in front of another. It's hard to take those steps, but I did just what I've always taught people my entire life as a fitness person, as an athlete, is I just have to take, 4 steps and then 8 and then 20 and then a quarter mile, then a half a mile, and to the point that I hired a personal trainer to make me strong again. Because for me, being physically strong, I knew would make me mentally strong. And so that's how I handle it. That's not how everybody should handle it, but I think the hardest thing is you have to take a step in some direction. So I often tell people one of my loves is hiking, and my husband and I hike on the Blue Ridge Parkway, or we always have. But it's like we choose the things that are 4 or 5 miles in and 4 or 5 miles out, and we do it several days in a row, and we're exhausted, and I can't do that anymore. So we went a couple of months ago, and I did about 3 miles, a mile and a half in, a mile and a half out. So for me, that's it. But I also love gardening. So when I can't do the things that are physically challenging, I go outside even for 10 minutes to touch the earth and to get fresh air, because I find that staying in my house makes me more miserable.
So it seems like what you're saying is it doesn't have to be a big thing. In other words, change can be incremental and it can be slow and it can be one step at a time.
Yes, it's not, I think we get hung up on looking at the big picture, and there can't be a big picture without stairs. You have to walk the smaller steps to get anywhere. And I know, because I did it to myself. I remember sitting in the office with my doctor at Chapel Hill, and I said, I just can't, I'm so unhappy. I'm not the person I was. He says, well, I'm just going to tell you to do what you would tell me to do. You need to start with some small steps, just like you did before. This was my last flare that I had, is that I mentally was not in a great place. And he said, you know what makes you happy. You have to take some steps and get started, which is what you would tell me to do. So it was great advice, and I did have to start back, and I shared with my best friend, and she makes me walk on the Greenway. I love it, but she encourages me, and I share with my family, and we do outdoor things. You can't wallow in where you are, because it never gets better.
Right. That's not productive. It's
Right.
not going to help. So you've done so many things in your life. What about your bucket list? Is there anything that you're thinking about?
It's so funny, because I have had people ask me that, and I'm like, I am not a bucket list person, so to speak. I like to be in the moment and take opportunities as they come to me, and I love to travel, but I've had that in my life. I've been really lucky. I've been to Australia and New Zealand and Greece and all these fabulous places. During all of what I've gone through the last 15 years with my disease, I still made it happen, or my family made it happen. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but right now I am helping the Vasculitis Foundation, which is my disease. I'm a medical webinar host, so I interviewed doctors about the advances in how to get rid of our disease, or how to find out what causes it, And so that's super important to me right now. And the other thing is just family. I want to spend more time with my dad, who's turning 93 next week, and my in-laws who are also in their 90s, and my children and my grandchild. These things are
How
important.
old are your kids?
I have two kids in their 30s who are both currently engaged, so that's kind of a fun part of our life. And I have a grandchild who's 11.
So you have a lot of good people around you.
We do.
Supporting you.
We do.
How can people follow what you're doing, Kathy?
I think probably the best thing to do is follow us on any of the social medias. We're Raleigh Karate on everything. So it's Facebook, Raleigh Karate, Instagram, Raleigh Karate, YouTube, Raleigh Karate. So
I'll put those links in the notes. And what about your book? Where can they find it?
my book is called Take Control. It's available through Karate International. We're self-published as well. I would advise people to look for Take Control, the program, because as you said, I taught it to you when I was teaching at Meredith, which I taught it for 20 years. I have a protege, Melissa Palmer, who's teaching at Meredith. She's also teaching the Take Control program everywhere, as well as one of your former guests, Bren Croson, who can teach the Take Control program. So the book is available through us and the program's available through them.
Kathy, thank you so much for sharing your story, spending time with us today, and just your great positive outlook on life. I know that my audience will really resonate and relate to your story.
Well, thank you.